Well, welcome to this discussion with the county on the erosion of the public access Bluff Trail. For many of us, this has been a continuing matter. For some of us, it's been a continuing burr in our saddle. And it's been I think, a far slower process to come toward some kind of resolution than we had, certainly than I had anticipated. As we get started, first let me convey Mike Riley's regrets. Mike, you know, our county supervisor, had planned to be here. He called me mid-morning and said that he had gotten off a late plane last night from 4 days of Coastal Commission meetings down in Southern California, and arrived to find a sick cat, a sick wife, and I think sick other things. And it just wasn't feasible, possible for him to be here today. I think our first order of business probably is to ask the folks here at the front table to introduce themselves. And Marty, we'll let you start. And just so.
Is this working? Yeah. I'm Marti Cambell. I'm on the board of the Sea Ranch Association, and I was the chairman of the board during the years when this round of discussion about bluff erosion started.
And I'm...
It's on, we just have to
Yeah.
This is one of these.
Okay. Is that working?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Eric Olsford. I'm with Base Geotechnical Consultant for the erosion.
Hi, I'm Michelle Julene. I'm the environmental specialist with Sonoma County Regional Parks Department.
I'm Mark Cleveland. I'm the supervising park planner for Regional Parks.
I'm Randy Burke, work for the Sea Ranch Association Water Company, and been with this BLUFF for at least 4 years.
I'm Mike Lane, Sea Ranch member, geologist, and I get to play with maps too. So I do GIS, and we'll talk more about the maps later.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm John Fox, community manager of the Sea Ranch Association.
And we would especially like to welcome our friends from the county, from Base Geotech, that we really do want to hear from you, want to hear about the progress. We want to hear about the process, and hopefully something about timelines, because I think our expectations were much too ambitious 3 years ago, 4 years ago when this problem started, as to how quickly we would get some resolution on it. There are many sea ranchers who have concerns about this, and I appreciate your giving them an opportunity later today to be heard with their concerns. And of course, the board also appreciates the opportunity to have some response in this matter too. So with that as an introduction, perhaps Mark, are you leading the band here for the...
Michelle and I will be splitting time on things. She's my CEQA expert, so she's the environmental specialist who can talk a little bit more about process and timing for our process. And issues related to the project itself or the timeline, I'm in as a historical background, so I've been with this the same time all of you have. So, and yeah, I'm just as amazed at how long things have taken to get to where they are. So,
Well, with that, perhaps we can start. Mark actually started talking about criteria for making decisions on the Bluff Trail restoration. And Marti, as the chair of the board, took the leadership in looking at that criteria from the point of view of the Sea Ranch. And so I thought it would be good if she were to start and tell us a little bit about that process.
Thank you, Jim. Before the meeting started, I was telling John McChesney that I was going to talk about the ancient history of bluff erosion. And he gave me a look, and I realized, of course, what I'm going to talk about is not the really ancient history. That's what John can talk about. But I'm going to talk about what led up to our developing as a community the bluff erosion principles, which are printed in the bulletin, and then I'm going to read them, because I think they're an important consensus that we reached back in 2005 about the criteria we as a community thought it was important to use when we look at how best to respond to these issues. This round of concerns about bluff erosion really started on March 5th, 2004, when the county issued a report about the 5 areas that we've subsequently discussed at great length, where the original surveyed trail was eroding away. And in that report, they had some very high-level suggestions about what might be done, and they also had a table in it that showed how various solutions to the issues at the foot of Sea Pine Reach could be resolved with a series of criteria, all of which reflected criteria that were good for the county and the general public, but didn't reflect any of the concerns of the sea ranchers, because they wrote that report from the county's perspective. In April of 2004, Mike Riley and Philip Sales, who at the time I believe was Mark Cleveland's boss and who has subsequently left the county, came to the board meeting, and at that meeting, Philip Sales presented that report from 2004, and he gave us the same presentation he had given to the Board of Supervisors when the County Parks Department asked for $40,000 to perform geotechnical and engineering studies on the sites in questions. At that meeting, Philip said that the county priority was restoring access to Walk-On Beach, and that's a theme that continued through all of these early discussions leading up to the 2005 timeline that John Fox and Mike Lane are going to talk about. After that, on June 5th in 2004, there was a forum with Mike Riley, and he came and talked specifically about these issues. He gave us a talk talking about Coastal Commission concerns and the interest of the county, and at that time he repeated their interest in restoring access to Walk-On Beach as a major driver to the county. He also repeated at that time his concern that we be able to resolve this in a way, he described it as keeping it in the family, as opposed to having the resolution become a big political brouhaha, similar to the ones that had happened in the real ancient history in the 80s that led up to the Bain Bill. Then, after that meeting in 2004, the county went away to spend the $40,000 and do the engineering studies. And the next time this came up was July 16, 2005, so that was about a year later. And at that meeting, that was a workshop, and Mike Riley and Mark Cleveland were here, and also Eric, I think you were here from BASE, presenting the BASE geotechnical recommendations about each of the sites. For that meeting, Mark had developed a draft of evaluation criteria that he was expecting might be used later on. And I took that draft at that point and used that as a starting point for the criteria that we then brought to the August and October board meetings of that year, where we solicited community input and ended up with our evaluation criteria. One of the things that was discussed both in the June 2004 forum and also in that July 2005 workshop, there was some discussion in those meetings about armament of the bluffs, Mike Riley stated very clearly in the 2004 meeting that the Coastal Commission didn't like armament of the bluffs, but if property was at imminent risk of being destroyed, they were known to make exceptions and give people authority to arm the bluffs. And then in the 2005 meeting, Mike Riley pointed out that he didn't know whether trails would be considered development by the Coastal Commission or not. So there was some discussion about armament of the bluffs in those meetings, but nothing was firm was said about it. Then also in 2005 at the August 27th meeting, Mark Cleveland attended as a guest during the part of the meeting where we were talking about bluff erosion, and that was where I presented to the board and the membership a list of draft criteria for evaluating various potential solutions to these problems, and we took input from the membership at that time. We then published that list in the Bulletin to solicit additional input from the membership, and then at the October board meeting, we voted on those principles and accepted them. In between the August and October meeting, Randy conducted field trips for any members who wanted to go look at the sites of erosion and hear Randy's perspective on those sites and what kinds of possible solutions might be developed to address the erosion there. Then on November 5th of 2005, we had a community workshop where Randy presented the proposed Sea Ranch solutions for each site, and there was discussion at that meeting. Subsequent to that meeting, Randy submitted a memo to Mark and the county with the Sea Ranch's recommendations. So at this point, I'd like to read the principles that we developed. And these are in the bulletin, copies of which were on the back table. And these are in no particular order, so they're not in order of priority. There are 14 of them. Number 1 is protect the physical and visual privacy of the Sea Ranch community and its members. Number 2, keep the public access bluff trail along the bluff. That came up in particular because one of the very early recommendations for dealing with the eroded bluff at the foot of Sea Pine Reach was to route the public along Sea Ranch roads and then go down another trail to get onto Walk-On Beach. Number 3, keep the public access bluff trail within its original surveyed boundaries to the greatest extent possible. Number 4, avoid routing the public along Sea Ranch roads and trails. Number 5, keep design oversight of any remedial features such as bridges with the design committee and other Sea Ranch professionals. Number 6, incur minimal or no additional duty or cost to the Sea Ranch for the care and maintenance of public access trails or added remedial features, for example, bridges and armoring. Number 7, assign costs to the county for any remedial features to the public access bluff trail. Number 8, limit visual impact of remedial features, for example, step-down bridges below ground level. Number 9, limit environmental damage. Number 10, provide long-term solutions. Coastal Commission rule of thumb that solutions should last for 75 years. Number 11, reduce the long-term effects of erosion. Number 12, emphasize safety of any remedial features. Number 13, seek solutions that have the support of the Sea Ranch community, the county, and the larger public. Number 14, implement remedial features expeditiously and sensitively to the neighbors. One thing I'd like to leave us with as we start the discussion today is to point out that on this list of criteria, some of them are criteria that would apply to everybody, both Sea Ranchers, the county officials, and also the public. And other ones of the criteria are really specifically oriented towards the Sea Ranch community. For example, the one about getting design committee approval for remedial features. And I think that's going to be important as we go forward with the discussion about next steps. So one thing that that I as a member would like to ask Mark and Michelle is that as we go forward and we talk about the next steps and how the CEQA process would work, We'd like specifically to know how these criteria can come into play as we go forward with this process, to be sure that we don't lose sight of them and that we use them effectively, integrating them into what you're going to do. Thank you.
I just realized that we jumped ahead of ourselves just slightly here, and I apologize, Mark. We were going to talk a little bit about goals at the very outset, and Mark, if you'd like to say a few words.
Yeah, originally when we were asked to come out here and do this presentation, a lot of discussion was made about goals, and I think there's a little bit of separation here between Sea Ranch goals and our goals. I don't really think there's a difference. I think we're all trying to accomplish the same thing, and we're trying to resolve this issue. And so we set up some criteria, and we have some goals for this meeting that we would like to accomplish, and I think they're actually common goals with everybody that's here at the table. Those are, the first one is to inform the Sea Ranch and its members of the CEQA process that we have to follow as a county department. It's based on state and county codes, and it includes anticipated milestone steps and a general timeline. The second goal we wanted to accomplish is to initiate a discussion regarding how we collaborate on a process to select preferred alternatives. You guys have given us your recommendations, but we haven't really done a collaborative process where we're looking at how we're going to resolve that and figure out what we're going to do. And the third part is to establish which alternatives we're going to be evaluating in the programmatic process for the environmental document. So those are our three main goals here. We want to know, first of all, we want to inform you about our process, and the timeline for that for CEQA. We want to inform you about or collaborate with you on ideas on how we might be able to evaluate our preferred alternatives together, and then also establish which ones we're going to review in the environmental document process. So that's what we came to the meeting hoping to accomplish.
And I think I've probably made my comments, so don't need to say anything further. I think next. We have John Fox and
Yeah, that's right.
yeah.
I'd like to begin, please, by asking Mike Lane to describe the exhibits so that you know what they represent as we talk. Mike, would you like to do that for us?
Well, I don't want to, excuse me, sidetrack the discussion here, but there have already been some interest and some comments about the map, so I thought a very quick review might be in order. These are for reference more for during the break and afterwards, and as we may need them. They're not intended to, we're not going to do the fine print and have a quiz afterwards. Everybody here has been to college classes where the professor says, no, you can't read this, but if you did, this is what it would say. And I don't want the maps to fall into that category, but in general, in front here we have an air photo of the Sea Ranch showing all 4 sites under discussion. These and the other photos are not satellite imagery, they are Sonoma County orthophotography, August 2004. And on top of them there's some GIS data, some layers of parcels and streets, again from Sonoma County. And that theme goes for all of the maps. These are all 4 sites. The 2 easels have the left-hand side, the 3 northern sites. The right-hand easel has the Sea Pine Reach enlargement. And then for those of you that may be at the mic and wanting to see something as you comment, the large map on the side there is, again, the 3 northern sites. And then the 2 smaller maps on the far left of that easel are some detailed 2-foot contours and some LiDAR imagery. This also is not satellite, this is kind of an airplane X-ray, if you will, which shows the bare ground. So it's if you stripped everything off with a bulldozer and looked at the ground surface. And so we can reference these during the discussion as needed. Thank you.
like to say how much my staff members and I and the board appreciate the positive working relationship which has really characterized this undertaking from the beginning. And I think great credit for that goes to Mark Cleveland and to Randy Burke, who worked on this long before I arrived here, and whose knowledge is therefore very valuable. What I would like to do this afternoon is talk about the progression of the research which has been conducted and the development of the options that have been put before us, especially during the last 2.5 years. Because I'm a relative newcomer, I had to go back to the original documents to see what the progression of thinking had been throughout this time. And so the April edition of the Bulletin, which unfortunately didn't reach many of you because of delays in the postal system, was nevertheless intended to be in your hands for today so that you could be prepared. It has been posted on the website, so those of you who have web access have had an opportunity to see it. And there are copies on the back table for those who have so far missed their copy. The document that you have there describes the Association's 14 principles that Marti Cambell just relayed again to us as principles that were worked out by the community and the board with involvement from county parks during public meetings. And it's very nice to have that kind of foundation for consideration of what we think, anyway, as far as the Sea Ranch is concerned, the principles should be which guide the end product. The document also contains a summary of all the reports and correspondence between county parks and the association between May 2005 and the present. The report talks about erosion mechanisms, remediation options, potential costs of remediation, based upon the documents provided by county parks and their geotechnical consultant based geotechnical. There are also documents to refer to which represent the Sea Ranch response to the original ideas, or the ideas which originated from county parks and from base geotechnical. And in my mind, at any rate, that November 2005 report is really a first response by the association to county parks and base geotechnical's ideas. In order to simplify the discussion, certainly in the report and now, we have, at least I have divided the discussion into the 3 erosion locations: Broadreach, Rockcod, and Mainsail at the north end of the Sea Ranch near Gualala Point County Park and the Golf Links. They're grouped together in the review because of their general similarities, although there are some differences which have been discussed. In general, they are similar. The most southerly location near Walk-on Beach, we call the Sea Pine Reach location, is discussed separately because in several ways the geologic and spatial circumstances are different and much more constraining at that location. It's hard sometimes to glean exactly what writers meant when they wrote reports, but I think it's always important to refer back to the written word when one considers what is the basis for moving forward. And so my comments in the bulletin and now are based on what I read in the reports rather than sort of involvement in meetings and conversations. Based on this written word, it appears that the county's preferred remediation options at the northern group of sites in Sea Pine Reach may have shifted during the past 2 years. That's a perception, and I'm sure through discussion with county parks who have read this article that they will want to talk about that. But that's my perception, and I think that's our perception. So we are hoping that during this discussion that County Parks will clarify whether or not these impressions of shift are valid. For example, in May 2005, County Parks ideas put forward included at these locations relocating the trail, pedestrian bridges, soil nail and rock anchoring bluff reinforcement, boulder rock riprap protection of the bluff from wave action, and a variety of drainage solutions. By March 2007, County Parks correspondence contained references mostly to relocating the trail, pedestrian bridges, and improvements to drainage. We're unsure whether this means that County Parks has or has not narrowed down the options under serious consideration. It appears that the bluff reinforcement and bluff protection possibilities may be being de-emphasized, and that remediation emphasis may be undergoing a change from long-term solutions to short-term, low-cost solutions. In the later correspondence, more prominent comments about general drainage issues on the Sea Ranch are discussed as primarily causative of the erosion, and that seems to have been emphasized in later correspondence. So we'd like to know, please, Mark, whether or not our perceptions of narrowed options are correct, and if so, what the basis is for those changes. And if our perceptions are correct or partially correct, we'd like to know what process was used to narrow down the options. The Bulletin article lists a number of specific questions for which we'd appreciate discussion and hopefully some answers. In February 2006, County Parks referred to the primary cause of erosion as subsurface drainage from the terrace deposits, from among the several erosion mechanisms listed in the earlier base geotechnical report. It would be of interest to us to know what site-specific data that conclusion is based on. We'd like to know whether pedestrian bridges, potentially with stairs at one or both ends, really preserve safe use of the public access trails. And of course, we're particularly interested in knowing whether that particular solution is aesthetically compatible with the natural coastal bluffs, unless of course they're built at other than the Blufftop level. We'd like to know if and why the use of boulder rock riprap is no longer favored as a protection against wave action, particularly at Sea Pine Reach. This idea, fortified by later responses back and forward, certainly appears to have changed. And leading into that, we'd like to know what the Coastal Commission's policy is with respect to this kind of wave action protection. You have referred in your correspondence to Coastal Commission policy in this regard. Perhaps later my colleague Mike Lane can discuss some work he has done on the use of this kind of bluff protection up and down the California coast. And finally, of course, we'd like to know how the CEQA process will be conducted, which will be the lead agency, how the project will be noticed, and what its timing will be, especially for the scoping session. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to give these questions a fair review, and of course, most importantly of all, hear and respond to the association members' questions after the break.
I will do my best.
Thank you very much.
I don't know, that's a pretty big order. I think the first thing to understand here is that we did respond to the recommendations that Randy made. Our response to those recommendations was not an endorsement or a negative to it. What we're looking at is trying to do something that's less engineered, less hard. And in responding to those things, we weren't saying this is what we prefer, this is what we prefer, but this will be evaluated during the process, just like all the other recommendations that BASE put together in their report. And a lot of you may not be familiar with all of the, John went into it in a little bit of detail, but with all the alternatives that are being proposed for each site, each one of those will be evaluated individually, including the recommendations that the Sea Ranch made. So we're not saying yay or nay to anything. We're not saying we have a preferred solution. I mean, if we had a preferred solution, it would not be a hard solution. That's true. But we haven't taken a stand or decided what our preferred solution is. There's a little talk about bridges. There's a little talk about stepping down bridges. There's issues related to that. One would be, I mean, from an aesthetic standpoint, it's probably better because you don't see them so much. But you still have disabled access issues to deal with and other things. So there's a whole bunch of complications to each proposal that we have that have to be evaluated individually. They have to be evaluated for their implementation impacts, for their long-term maintenance impacts, and for sustainability. And those are the three criteria that we looked at as strongly needed to be looked at in addressing these issues. So the other issues that we feel strongly about is the actual cost of maintaining these things over the long term. And we don't think a hard solution is going to hold up for 75 years. And even though the 75 years is really more about building on the coastal bluffs, it's not about a trail. We don't know that any of these will do so. We need to do more evaluations of these solutions to see if they will last that long. If there really is something here that makes sense, that's sustainable for us, and that will last 75 years or whatever it's going to be. A couple of other things that were brought up here, a change of shift in our perspective on this. There really hasn't been any. My perspective on this has always been to find a soft solution to the problem and not have to do anything structural that affects the integrity of the aesthetics of the bluff. And I think we all feel that way to some degree. It's just a matter of how we accomplish that and how we get to that point. Let's see. I don't have information on the Coastal Commission. As part of the work we do on the bluff, we have to get a coastal permit. That will determine what kinds of techniques and other things that we can use in order to stabilize the bluff. I think that's really important here to understand also that we're not really stopping bluff erosion. What we're trying to do is slow it down a little bit. And in addition to these 5 sites that we have here, we have several other sites where we're going to be in the same boat in the next 10, 20 years. And a process to kind of like get through this and figure out how we're going to deal with this in the future is really important to me. I think a lot of what needs to be done still is we need some in-depth civil and structural analysis of the solutions that we're presenting to see how they really will function in this environment. In the case of 43A and 43B, we have a very unique situation, as John pointed out. And I think, you know, with the loss of the commons there and private property being, you know, affected very significantly by this full action, that was going to take some special solution to deal with. And so I don't have the answers about that. As far as use of riprap there, something structural will have to be done there. We don't have any choice. If we want to restore the public access easement at that location, something will have to be done. Either stairs, a seawall, a riprap situation, something structural will have to be done to restore that, if there's no other alternative. So he's correct about that one. That one is one that we don't have a choice on. The other ones, I think there are some other choices. I think the last one has to do with more about CEQA. Is there something I'm still missing here, John, as far as responding to you?
No, I think you responded very well.
Okay. The last one has to do more with CEQA issues, and it's about timelines and what our process is and things like that. I can get into a little bit more detail about the options that we selected. We actually have a handout here that shows all the options that were evaluated in basis reports and that were presented by the county. If anybody would like to have them, we can have somebody pass these out. These include all the options we had in the original reports. It also includes the Sea Ranch recommendations from November 2005. And at this point, we're looking at addressing all of those and evaluating all of those for the impacts and everything else. There's only 50 of them in there, so I apologize. I know we have a lot of people, but if you're with somebody, could you please share them? I'd appreciate it. So in terms of CEQA, we will be the lead agency. We will be the ones that will be processing the documents. We'll be holding the public meetings. We will be bringing this to the board. We will be bringing it through our process, which includes several steps that I'll have Michelle get into in more detail. A little bit hard at this point to give you a schedule. I can tell you how long those steps generally take for us to do. But until we have our analysis done, until we have somebody hired to do the job, a schedule is a little bit early to try and develop a schedule. We can give you a timeline for those activities to take place, but at this point, that's about all we can do, and I apologize for that. We just don't have any more funding in place to hire somebody to do the work at this point right now, but we are working towards that with Mike Riley, the Coastal Conservancy, and our own park mitigation needs to hire somebody. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle to talk a little bit about the CEQA process. And we also have some handouts for you guys on that one, but we only have 50 of those as well. So perhaps when those folks get done, we can hand out some of these things. We have a flow chart here that's a little bit easier to follow, but it talks about the steps that we have to go through to meet our own county and also the state requirements for the California Environmental Quality Act process.
People at the table want to pass those out. I'm going to get these going. This is a flow chart that I put together. It's very simplistic. And this document goes with it. And it just describes some of the steps that we have to go through for CEQA compliance. Can everyone hear me okay now?
I need to really get in there.
Okay, how's this? Better? All right. I'm not accustomed to talking with a microphone. I usually think my voice will just project. So, but this is a really big room. So in a project like this one, we'll have a couple of choices to make regarding strategy for the CEQA document. And I'll touch on some of that a little bit in my presentation, and then when I'm done talking, of course, if any of you have questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Because we're a public agency in Sonoma County, we have to comply with the Sonoma County Code, which has some additional requirements to CEQA implementation, in addition to the state CEQA guidelines. And generally that includes a process of going to the Sonoma County Environmental Review Committee. And this committee actually determines what type of CEQA document is appropriate for a project. So in this case, we would prepare what's called an initial study document. And we would take that document to the Sonoma County Environmental Review Committee, and they would tell us if it would be appropriate to prepare what's called a mitigated negative declaration or an environmental impact report. A mitigated negative declaration can be prepared in cases where the project will not result in potentially significant environmental impacts. And the environmental impact report is prepared for those projects where there might be potentially significant environmental impacts. So that's kind of where the process splits. So what we could do is, and here's where the choice comes in, is we could assume we need to prepare an environmental impact report, and then we can just prepare a very simple initial study, take it through this environmental review committee process, and then launch right into the environmental impact report process. Or we could try for a mitigated negative declaration, put a lot of effort into the initial study, take it to ERC, and then see what happens. And then it's maybe they'll agree it's a mitigated negative declaration, or maybe they decide it's an environmental impact report.
So that's what I'm getting. I'm saying that there's some strategy that we still have to determine what's going to be best and most efficient for this project. And we'll get to that point after we have been able to identify some of the alternatives that really need to be studied in the environmental process. And as part of that will be, I think Mark alluded to having an engineer analyze some of the alternatives for engineering type impacts and things that we just have to be aware of. So in terms of timeline, what we're sort of looking at right now is, I know that you all have developed your recommendations and criteria, and we're well aware of those. County still has to develop its criteria for how alternatives will be evaluated, and we have to go through our own internal process to determine what we want to have the engineering consultant take a look at. And we expect to have that part of the process completed probably by early fall of this year, if all goes well. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's when our family
Okay.
takes place again.
And then at that point, once we have, a pretty solid grasp of the alternatives that are most feasible for this project, then we'll be able to initiate the CEQA process. And then that's where we get into the flow chart. We generally put out a notice of preparation even for our initial studies. CEQA doesn't require that step for initial studies, but we at Parks do it anyway because it's a really great opportunity to get public involvement really early in the process. And that notice of preparation process includes a 30-day public review period. We take those comments and we use them to help prepare the CEQA initial study. We have special studies done by expert consultants if it seems like they might be needed. I know there's been a lot of geotechnical studies done for this project already, but we may have to do biologic resource studies, cultural resource studies. There might be some other things that are identified that we need to have special consultants do. Then we prepare the initial study, and then it goes to Sonoma County Environmental Review Committee. And like I said, to the degree to which how comprehensively we prepare that initial study will depend on the strategy that we all decide together is the best for this particular project. But in a case where it seems like the project won't have significant environmental impacts, and we're going to try for the mitigated negative declaration, then we would take it to ERC. If they agree with the recommendation that it's a mitigated negative dec, then it goes off on its 30-day public review period. We take those comments, we prepare responses to comments, make changes to the documents as needed, and then it will go to, usually it goes to our Park and Rec Advisory Commission, maybe a meeting here, public meeting to get more comments during that public review period, and then eventually it goes to Sonoma County Board of Supervisors, who makes all of the final determinations on the environmental documents and on the project. If ERC decides that the environmental impact report is warranted for this type of project, then we have to publish the notice of preparation for the EIR, and that is required in CEQA. So the NOP is required for the EIR, optional for the mitigated negative declaration. So even if we published it for the initial study, we would have to redo that process. We would prepare additional studies if they were identified, prepare the EIR, and then the EIRs carry a minimum 45-day public review process, and then pretty much the rest of the process is the same. During the public review period, we would typically have public meeting before our Park and Rec Advisory Commission, perhaps a meeting here, get our comments in, we would prepare responses to comments, modify the document, and then take it to the Board of Supervisors for approval. After the board approves or adopts, certifies the environmental document, then they can take action on the project, whether or not to approve it. And generally, I would say that to get through, if we were going to assume that an EIR was needed for this project, then, and let's just say that we were going to do the quick and dirty initial study to get through the ERC process, we could probably be at that point, perhaps by the end of the year, probably take, 6 or 8 months or so, depending on how that's done. If we wanted to try for the mitigated negative declaration and actually prepare a really solid initial study document, that would take a bit longer. I would anticipate that we, might need biologic resource studies and cultural resource studies, primarily to get through the coastal permit process. And so that would depend mostly on the blooming periods for the plants out here, which I know that there's some plants that bloom into very late summer or early fall. So that we might not be able to get through that process until December of next year, just because of the amount of time needed for the studies. And then of course, if we assume that we're going to do the quick and dirty initial study, get through ERC, move straight into the EIR, then it might be possible to, to then fall in line with the doing the biologic resource studies, during the course of time next year, and then probably another 6 months thereafter for processing. So we would be looking at June of '09.
I think what you're getting here is a handle on how complicated it is when you start doing hard solutions, because hard solutions have to be analyzed for impacts. And we have 2 layers of CEQA here. I think Michelle really didn't get into that too much, but we have a programmatic document which really covers all the alternatives and looks at all the solutions. And then once we select a solution, we have to go back and do the CEQA process again for the individual alternatives. So there's 2 ways of structuring this. One is you can do the programmatic document with specific CEQA on an alternative that we all agree on. So we have a lot of hard work to do before we get to that point to come together to decide on that. Or we can do the programmatic document, and then when we decide on the alternative, go back through the CEQA process before we construct it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I talked about, one type of strategy, making assumptions about whether or not we know we need to prepare an EIR. But there is another type of strategy regarding, as Mark said, whether you prepare what's generally called a project-specific document or a programmatic level document. And it's true, what Mark said, with the programmatic level document, all the impacts are analyzed very superficially and very generally for a wide range of alternatives. And then when the Board of Supervisors selects an actual project that's going to be approved and implemented, then we would go back through the CEQA process again and analyze the project-specific impacts of that exact project. The other way to go is you could do, and what we do most frequently for parks projects is a project-specific CEQA document, so we only have to go through the process one time. Obviously there's a huge advantage in terms of time to get to implementation if you're just going through this process one time. But that can become a really complicated, wily document if we're analyzing many different alternatives all at the same level. That can be a very cumbersome document to prepare and get moved through the process. So, I mean, what it kind of gets down to, the ideal situation is that we, both parks and the association would be able to, at some point, come to agreement on a preferred alternative for, for resolving the issues associated with this project, and then we can just do the project-specific CEQA document one time. So everybody looks a little blown away and confused. Are there any questions I can answer at this point?
We gotta live long enough.
Yes, Michelle, I have a question from the far end over here. It's called the hidden corner, but anyhow.
I see.
And incidentally, thank you for the presentation, even though it's mind-boggling. I remember a CEQA presentation of a while back that yours is so much better that I thank you for that. That said, I'm still confused on some things. Well, for starters, how does either the programmatic document or the specific project document relate to the initial study that Mark, that's in your handout here? Are they the same or different?
Well, we have to prepare initial studies for the county because we have to go through this environmental review committee process, and that's required by the county code. If we didn't have that obligation, and we determined right now that we think the EIR is really the appropriate document, we could just start there, but we're encumbered by this step in the process right now. So the initial study can be used in a couple of different ways. One, it could be if we really want to try for the mitigated negative declaration, then the initial study is the only CEQA document. And so it's used to describe the project and analyze all of the environmental impacts of the project. It proposes mitigation measures that will be implemented to reduce the impacts. And then the board approves that whole package, and then you can just go. You can start, the next part. In a case where an EIR is required, we have a little bit of a choice with how we use the initial study. We can still prepare a really good initial study and use it to focus the impacts that need to be addressed more in depth in the EIR. Or we can prepare just a kind of like, I call it the quick and dirty initial study, just to get something before the Environmental Review Committee in a very short fashion, just to get through that part of the process, and then leave all of the environmental analysis for the EIR.
Right. And thank you for clarifying, and then you covered that also. But where does a programmatic document fall in? What does that refer to? The initial study?
No, that would refer, well, it could. You can do programmatic level. There's a whole wide world of CEQA.
Maybe we better stop while we're ahead.
But to answer your question in brief, it really, the distinguishing factor between initial study, mitigated negative declaration, and EIR is level of impact, not programmatic or project specific. Because you can have a programmatic level mitigated negative declaration if you don't expect potentially significant impact as a result.
I have one other, if I may take just a minute for one other question. Who comprises the ERC?
Mostly county employees, and within that, mostly employees of the Sonoma County Permit and Resource Management Department. They represent different areas of expertise. There's also a representative from the Agricultural Commissioner's Office and also a representative from California Department of Fish and Game.
And there's one representative from Public Works.
Oh, them too.
Are those meetings open to the public?
They are.
Yes, yeah, they are. And what we do at Parks is we send out postcards to everybody on a project mailing list so that they know when the meeting is occurring. They're held, I can tell you right now, they're held on the first and third Tuesdays in the morning. So you can kind of keep that in mind.
I wonder if we have a question out here, but let me preempt just momentarily and ask you, how do we get to the point where the decisions that you need to make as you enter this process get made?
So by that, I would assume which alternatives we're going to study.
Which alternatives, which strategy, you've raised a whole bunch of kind of entry questions. How do we enter into this process?
Yeah, I think that, Mark alluded to that a little bit in his remarks is, what we really, and it's one of our goals for the meeting today, is to begin that discussion about the collaborative process we're going going to use to derive that, because, you know, of course, ideally, we'll be able to come to an agreement about a preferred project and, you know, have a very, you know, simple CEQA document, a simple CEQA process. That would be the best for all of us. And we have your recommendations and we have your 14 criteria. But what we have to do next is, at the county level, is develop our screening criteria. We're going to have the engineering analysis done on the different alternatives and then come up with our preferred alternative. And then probably we're going to have to come back to the association and discuss that and see, you know, where we can come to an agreement.
There was a question over here.
Yeah, I'm Terry Lowell, I'm from Unit 28, and by profession, I'm a civil engineer in land development, deal mostly in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Valley, and deal a lot with the CEQA issues. And what I heard you say here today, I just have some questions about that. Because in a mitigated negative declaration, that's really the best environmental document you can have for a project, because you're concluding when you finish that you have no significant impacts that can't be mitigated. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. If you, and that's the whole premise of the mitigated negative declaration, is that all of your potential impacts can be mitigated to a less than significant level.
In the area in which I practice, those times that we use an EIR is because we have to have overriding findings where there are impacts, even though they're mitigated, they are still above a level of significance.
True.
In those cases, mostly it's the loss of resource habitat, air quality, or traffic impacts, which I don't see those with respect to these four project sites. So what might you see here on these four project sites where impacts are so significant they can't be mitigated?
You know, I really don't have an opinion on that right now. And I wouldn't have an opinion on that until, you know, I actually got into working with the project a little bit more, and probably after the engineering analysis is done on the alternatives. I don't know if Mark has any other comment on that question.
I think most everything could be mitigated. There's no doubt about that. It's what the mitigation is, and it's a few other issues that have to be raised. So we don't know that. We don't know the answer to that yet, whether it can be mitigated or not. That would be presupposing that we know the results of our CEQA analysis, which we're not there yet. We have a ways to go to identify the impacts. So we've looked at them in a base sort of sense, from, you know, actually implementing or constructing improvements, and also what it will take to maintain them. But we haven't gotten to that level of analysis yet to know. Most things can be mitigated, and we're hoping to do it that way and avoid an EIR process, but we don't know that right now. I think that's the best answer I can give you.
Have there been any projects in the area where there have been impacts that haven't been able to be mitigated?
In this area?
Right. Be it Caltrans project or anybody else's project, because the coastal.
Yeah, you know, I couldn't really speak to that either. I don't believe Regional Parks has had any projects up in this area that have required an EIR. But, you know, I can't speak to other jurisdictions.
Well, it seems like between the parks and the Sea Ranch Association over the last several years, a lot of effort has gone into these projects, which I really commend everybody for. And the Sea Ranch Association does a great job in communicating to us, the members, of what's going on, which I really appreciate. And in your flow chart over on the EIR side, it talks about additional studies. And again, maybe the question's premature. You know if there are additional studies that you might require that haven't already been conducted on this site.
Yeah, that's why it says if needed, because we really totally don't know. And I put that box in the flow chart because it is a possibility, you know, but I mean, we don't even know if we're going to be on this side of we went through the full initial study process and, we went under the premise of trying to obtain the mitigating negative declaration, and we did, studies. Hopefully, we wouldn't have to do anything additional, but that's part of what the public comment period is
Right.
for, is to identify those things. So,
Right, after you do the initial study.
And to get into that in a little more detail, the coastal permit will probably require an hydrological report of some type, because we are doing, most of these solutions that we're going to be analyzing do require some ground disturbing activities. And that kicks into that coastal permit to do the archaeological resources studies. So there's some things there that we would probably be required to do with the permit, regulatory permitting, that maybe, we're just trying to address in this position right here. So.
Well, I would suspect that whatever environmental document it ends up with, it's going to be, one document is going to be as thick as the other document. Whether you do mitigated neg deck or you do an EIR, you're going to do good technical science, like Base has done already, for whichever document you end up with. Thank you.
thank you.
I have one more question, if I may, sort of following on that. I had a notion going into this, and which may, oh, I'm sorry, Marty, I didn't see this.
No, go ahead and I'll go after.
Oh, okay. I had a notion, overly simplistic and maybe wrong, that if you're going to do soil nails and armor the bluff and do a seawall, you probably need an EIR, but if you put some subdrains in, you probably wouldn't. Is that really off target?
Well, I'll try and answer that because I'm a little bit more familiar with the techniques that were being proposed. I think if you get down to the bluff bottom and start excavating the toe for a granite wall or for a riprap wall, yeah, you're going to be at a different level of impact than if you do subdrains.
Yeah, a seawall is hard to hide.
Yeah.
Breaks the
Even more concerned to me is getting down there to do the work. I mean, that's where I'm kind of going, well, how are you going to get the equipment down there to do the work? It's 60 feet high. You're going to drop it with a helicopter? You're going to build a road down the bluff face to do it? I mean, those are all things that have to be addressed. It's not just how we do it. It's not just what we're doing, but how we do it. And those got to be addressed in the neighborhood as well.
I'd like you guys to talk about how the Coastal Commission fits into all of this. Do you go through the entire CEQA process and do all the negotiating with us, and we reach all our agreements, and you get all the reports, and it goes to the Board of Supervisors, and the Board of Supervisors say yes, yes, and we're all happy, and then you have to go to the Coastal Commission, and the Coastal Commission can say no?
We're going to answer that real simply, is that once we open this up to public process, the Coastal Commission will be involved in whatever we're doing. So they will be here at the very beginning.
So they'll be involved along the way?
Correct, and I've already had correspondence with them from years back. We haven't really involved them in this process to date because we're trying to kind of collaborate on what we're going to do and then go to the Coastal Commission with a, sort of like, we're unified on this is what we want to do. But once we open this up for public review or public noticing and the CEQA process starts, then all the people that would be from the outside would be involved. So COAST and Coast Walk and Coastal Conservancy, Coastal Commission, anybody else that's involved will all be pulled into this and will know what's going on with this because they'll be notified.
But does the Coastal Commission just send a representative to the public meeting like everybody else does?
Often they do.
And then can they require presentations to the Coastal Commission itself? And if they do that, how do they do that? I mean, how do they work through you to integrate that into the chart that you've handed out? Which is a very...
Well, you said the Coastal Commission assigns somebody to the project, and they will present that to their board. But I think we're really not to that point yet, and I'm not sure how that process is going to work. But hopefully somebody will come from the Coastal Commission and tell us how that process will work. Once again, I said, we have to get a coastal permit for it, and I think that process will be a staff person will be assigned, and then they will come to the meetings, and they'll probably have to present that to the Coastal Commission through the permit process.
Okay.
And Michelle may be able to expand on that a little bit.
All I was really going to add is to kind of answer your question with a yes. I mean, we do go through the whole CEQA process, and Mark is correct that we do include any regulatory agency that could have a role in our project in our public process, because we really want to get early feedback from them as well as from the public about what the CEQA document needs to include. Frequently we'll do do site visits with representatives from the various agencies so that when they're reading the document and they're giving us recommendations, they've seen it and they know what we're talking about. But to answer your question, we apply for the permits after we get the CEQA document done. And yeah, they could at that point give us additional requirements and things they want us to do in order to issue the permit.
But I would gather from what Mark said that they will have assigned a staff person to work on this so that if the public sector works like the private sector, hopefully that staff person, if they're really good, they would have told you/us the things we needed to consider. And if we got to the point where the whole process was done and they said no, it would reflect a serious mistake.
I
By
hear what
somebody.
you're saying now. What you're saying to me is that, will they tell us what we can and can't do before we decide what we're gonna do? Is that
Mark,
kind of-
may I just add, the Coastal Commission has an engineer, Leslie Ewing, and a geologist, Mark Johnson, who will be looking at the technical aspects.
Along the
of
way.
whatever's proposed also,
Okay, along the way.
along the way.
Right,
Yes,
that's
not
what I just want to make sure of, is that they'll be involved along the way, so that if you get to the very end and somebody says no, that would be embarrassing, not the way things always happen. Okay.
Did you want to do questions now, Jim, or should we be breaking?
Well, I think at this point, the questions should be focused on the CEQA process and the materials that Mark have presented.
I think there's something we're a little bit missing on it.
I guess what I'm concerned about, and maybe this is a question for later, we're talking about all the hard solutions to the problem in CEQA and all the things that are in it. What is a soft solution, and that needs to be on the table? I don't know how many of us will agree to a soft solution if indeed we can avoid all this 2, 4, 8 years of whatever. Can somebody give me a definition of a soft solution?
Well, a soft solution would be minor gradients of landscaping and relocating the trail in the Blufftop. That would be one example of a soft solution. So moving the trail.
As opposed to breastworks and bridges and
Correct.
concrete.
I think what she's handing out right now, I'll have Michelle talk a little bit about it, but I think part of what we need to do is to develop our project objectives and a few other criteria to establish it before we can really move forward with the process. And I'm going to have Michelle talk a little bit about what this says here. They're handing it out now. Those are all critical factors, and I think something that John brought up some time ago is like, what are we doing? Where are we going? You know, what do we need to do now? What's our next step? And I think this is a good idea of what our next step needs to be for us as a group. Did you get a copy of that, John? Okay.
I think I know it. So what this handout describes generally is the process that we'll be using at the county to get through our process of recommending an alternative or various alternatives. And it's basically a 5-step process of developing the project objectives and then developing screening criteria that correlate with those project objectives. And Mark, while Mark was talking, I jotted down 5 that he mentioned, and I'll just say them again, are implementation, maintenance, sustainability, cost, and this concept of the soft solution where possible. So those are some ideas that we might be working with in terms of developing project objectives and screening criteria. Then you develop your range of alternatives by basically, the way I kind of think about it is you pass the alternatives through a screen, and that's the criteria. And the ones that make it through the screen are the ones that you consider more fully to include in your CEQA document. And then in a case like this, where there are so many alternatives that are being considered and have been looked at already, then ideally you prepare a document that describes your process and why some things, how the criteria were applied and why some alternatives made it through the screen and other alternatives didn't. And then, move on with the CEQA part of the process. So when we've been talking about the next steps that we're going to be taking at Parks are developing this, basically going through this process, having the engineer, run through the engineering impacts of the different alternatives, and then we'll be prepared to talk with you about our preferred alternative or alternatives. And then hopefully at that point we can come to, an agreement between the county and the association about what should be included in the CEQA document, and then we can move on from there. On the back of this sheet are your 14 principles, Blufftop principles. So just want you to know that we're very aware of those, and we'll be keeping them. What we're hoping for actually is we do see a lot of areas where we totally agree with those principles and can incorporate them into our screening criteria.
I wonder if you will have the screening criteria available for the association to look at it after you've developed it. That would be very useful for us in understanding kind of your thinking, so that we can perhaps be well, first look for differences, but also more importantly, I think, understand where the convergences are. Marti?
This is a question about how we can collaborate better. When I went back, since my little 10-minute part of the presentation was about what we did several years ago, it's fresh in my mind that it seems like we'll have one of these meetings and then 9 or 12 months goes by and then we have another meeting. And there's some progress from meeting to meeting, but also to some extent we talk about the same things over and over, maybe with a little bit more information. But it seems like now we sort of have a level set, and we're all saying that we want to collaborate to come to the part where we can then establish the strategy and start doing the part of the public process that we need to do, both to satisfy the law, but also to solicit the input from other parts of the larger community about this that have to be addressed before we can make a decision and go on. I am hopeful that Parks will, I came out of the private sector, and in the private sector, when you work on a big project with lots of parties involved, they're more successful if you collaborate along the way than if you wait until there's a finished document and then present it to the other party, and then have the other party have to comment on the finished document, and then everybody goes away and they redo the finished document. So I, as a member and a member of the board, would hope that we can come up with a collaborative project, actually collaborate along the way, so that at the point that we get to the end of this year, we will have had some discussion more frequently than every 6 or 8 months to reach this agreement about which ones of these we want to go forward with. I know that the county has, that you all have requirements for how public meetings have to be and how you make these decisions, and I think we can accommodate any requirements you have to make the board available to have discussions with you, and staff can work with you without having to have an announced public meeting to get to the point where we can have something that we can then discuss in a public meeting. But I'm impatient, and we have members who are very impatient because we have a trail that's closed to our members as well as to the public, and now it's been closed for 3 years, and we'd like for it to not be 3 more years. So I guess I would beseech you to try to think about how we can work together in between these big public meetings to be sure that we keep things going and that we can reach some decisions, because I think certainly staff and the people who John calls on for his input have enough information about what these various alternatives are to be able to make some real progress at this point. And I suspect that you do too.
With permission, Mr. Chairman, Ernie Carpenter for Susan Clark. I wasn't going to speak now, saving my comments, and we will offer you a solution, at least with respect to Unit 34 A and B. However, I wanted to comment on the CEQA process and just point out that quick and dirty and simple are not concepts to be associated with Unit 34 A and B. And I know you know that, it's only a figure of speech, but we're going to expect a little bit more in-depth analysis through the CEQA process, so I just wanted to make that point publicly. And secondly, when the county and the association are coming to agreements with which Susan Clark and I totally appreciate the fact that you're talking, it feels good, we like the communication. She in fact is a productive member of both organizations, the county and the Sea Ranch Association, but we will in no way abrogate our rights to these discussions in terms of what's going to happen there at Unit 34 and 38. And again, I don't want to be negative whatsoever, but just to point out that the private party has equal rights in the CEQA process, and I know you know that, but I want to put it on record, and again, I'll come back with some more positive comments, and thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have one other.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, but one question back to Michelle for the document here, the alternative selection criteria. Is this like a pre-scoping session, or does this replace the scoping under CEQA?
Well, first of all, scoping isn't required in CEQA. It's something that CEQA encourages, but it's not a requirement. So anything that we're doing here is not a replacement at all. At regional parks, we do include scoping sessions during our notice of preparation review period, and that's just our standard process, whether we're preparing an initial study or an EIR, because we're very interested in the public process. So we will still have a CEQA scoping session regardless of any other meetings that we have.
Okay, but that's I think a good answer, because that tells me that this process is the real deal, is what it is.
Oh yeah, this is a real deal.
It's not a warm-up for CEQA.
No, I think if you take the last 3 years, it's all been sort of a collaborative process outside the scope of CEQA, trying to come to some agreement, but it's all been like scoping, sort of. I mean, it's all been kind of working towards that end.
Okay.
Yeah, it takes a long time, we have a lot of differences in where you want to go with things, but it is a collaborative process. So the CEQA is just a different, now it becomes a legal requirement than what we do legally and what we're going to do as part of our outreach with you guys. It's a little bit different than what is required of us legally. So.
No, that's good, and following on Jim's comments here, then that makes the collaboration, and Marty's comments, this makes the collaboration aspect all the more critical at this point and not later.
You have something more? Or?
No, we're just kind of discussing a couple other ideas here. I think, really where we need to go right now is really, I'm not so sure that starting the public process right now is a good idea. I think maybe what we need to do right now is get together and establish the criteria that melds both your Blufftop principles with the county's own criteria and see where we can find some common ground. And I think that's part of what she's talking about in developing the project objectives and selecting the alternatives. Maybe we can thin these things down a little bit. I mean, all of you have this list of things that we evaluated. So this is each site broadly, and there's 5 listed options that we're going to look at there. Maybe we can thin some of these out. Maybe we don't need to evaluate each and every one of them, but we have to come up with if we're going to do it from an alternative basis, we have to evaluate at least 2 or 3 alternatives, and including a no project alternative under CEQA. So maybe what we do is we try and thin this thing down a little bit more, kind of bang our heads together a little bit and see where we can go, and make this a little less cumbersome, maybe is the right idea. And that's kind of what we're talking about as far as process. We can do that before CEQA starts. If we can't agree on it, then we'll start the CEQA process. But I'm hoping that we will be able to at least come to some conclusions on things. I think we've evolved a little bit on one of the locations already where we kind of went back and forth and we're seeing how we can deal with things, and we realized that really the original idea wasn't that good for anybody, and so maybe there's other ways of collaborating on these things so we can reach some sort of consensus. And that's my hope. I mean, you've been real valuable in providing some backup information to base, and that's been helpful in us looking at different ways of doing the drainage and things like that. And having more knowledge is good, and having enough information to analyze the impacts and look at really good, solid, long-term solutions is really important.
John Raymond, Unit 1974. I think your description of what we should do next is excellent, but it would be useful, although you've already done this, to write down in a single, clear, declarative sentence what you think the objective is. That is, yeah, you want it minimally and all that, but what is it you're trying to do? How would we know that you would be successful when we're done? Do you want, for instance, to keep full access open all the way, or is it that you want to maintain access to some beaches and open access to other? Something like that. It's the minimum customer requirement, if you will. What is it that we would know when we're done, regardless of what the cost is, that you can have what you think is your objective? Because that may not be identical with what the objective is.
Our goal is to restore and maintain public access to all of the public access easements in the Sea Ranch. That's our goal. One simple statement. How we achieve that goal and the objectives we use to get there, I think there could be some collaboration on it. That is our goal.
Could you write it up there?
Everybody heard me, it's recorded.
Say it one more time, Mark.
Our goal is to establish or restore and establish public access in the Sea Ranch on all of our existing easements.
Could you append to that, though, to best comply with the Sea Ranch principle?
That's, I'm going to cut him off before we get into too much trouble here. That's why the developed of project objectives is like the first thing on this list right here. And as we've been saying, is like we have not gotten together at the county level to like firmly establish what the project objective statement is. And I totally agree, it needs to be very clear. It needs to be, published. And it obviously needs to be something that can be achieved. And quite frankly, in a project like this, it should be something that we all agree together is the project objective. And we're just not there yet. I think what Mark just said as a project objective is a great start. But by the time we're done with this process, I think the objective statement will be a little more rounded to include something what you just brought up right now, and it might also include some other parameters that need to be considered as well.
I'm thinking this is probably a good time to take our break. And look at the maps during break time, think about it, come back with your questions. And we'll reconvene at, maybe 10 to 12 minutes from now. Certainly by 20 hours.
Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
We put up some information, if you call the attention of everyone if they would like to look at what the whole park is.
Susan Clark has placed some information behind me that has reference to the visual effects of bridges. And I don't know, maybe there's more. I know that there's that much. And, so take a look at this material. During the break, one of the things that's on the agenda that we didn't really work through as much as I think folks would like to hear is the notion of what are the options that have been proposed, and I guess kind of what are the general characteristics of those options. I thought Mark might say a few words about that. to start with, and then we'll open up again for questions.
On the handout that was passed around, you can see it starts with Broadreach site 4074A. These are the alternatives that were looked at in the original feasibility study done by Parks, and then subsequently under basis geotechnical reports. And a quick summary of those: 74A and 72A really are the same list of options. One of them is to just move the trail away from the slide area, the failure area. Another one is to build a pedestrian bridge with piers and horizontal drains. Another one would be to shotcrete or gunite the face and use fabric and horizontal drains, soil nails, and rock anchors. And if there's specific questions about those, I'll defer to the two geologists we have here, because that's more of their thing than mine. Another of the ones was to install riprap, which means excavating a key and placing riprap down there and installing horizontal drains. And then the Sea Ranch came up with one that was like a combination of two of the items above. It has to do with installing drains, using riprap, but then also doing some grading to keep the water from moving across there, and also planting vegetation to kind of soften it up, absorb some of the water that might be coming, and also help stabilize the areas. So those are the options that were presented for sites 74A and 72A. And I'll call them out by name because I think that's probably easier for people. Broadreach is 74A, and Rock Cod is 72A. For Mainsail, a little bit different situation. It's sort of like a cave in there. It's really not a failure of the toe. It's more of a failure of the top material in there, where there's a caving that's going undermining the trail. In that particular case, one of the options was actually discussed several times among staff and was actually deleted, and that was to grout the cell somehow and put some horizontal drains, and nobody really feels like that's a viable solution there. So we're still looking at three other options. One is to relocate the trail away from the bluff again, a pedestrian bridge with drainage, and then the shotcrete and gunite face, once again using like rock nails and soil anchors, things like that. Del Mar Point, Site 60A, we did a field site visit with staff here at Sea Ranch, and we determined that the trail is still in its easement and there's really no immediate danger of losing the trail there. So that one's not even being considered in this process. And then the last one, obviously, is Sea Pine Reach, which are several alternatives that are being looked at there. The relocate the trail away from the Blufftop, obviously being a really short-term solution if we're to keep it in front of those lots, because there is very little commons left there. So most of the solutions, if we're to keep the trail where it is, would be hard solutions, which would be riprapping, doing the shotcrete again, once again, riprapping. There's also the option of putting a stairway to the north of those lots and going down to the beach that way. That was one of the options explored initially. It was also one of the original options in discussions early on when they were looking at easements. The problem with that one, and we've identified that, is at high tide, people will be forced to walk on the Sea Ranch Trail, so we're not sure how that will work in high tide conditions. So it wouldn't provide access back that way if the tide came in. And then, the other option, and this is one that wasn't really explored, but it's similar as a hard option, would be to look at a seawall along that whole stretch there. So that's one other option that could be explored in this process, but was not identified in any of the reports that we did. Sea Ranch option for that would be to riprap the face and install the horizontal drains instead of sub-drains, which I think is a probably good idea because there is septic there that could be affected. Catch all the existing drains that are there, because the original drainage permits allow for people to drain their roof structures down through the bluff, and those need to be reconnected to a new system to take them away from the bluff. And then install catch basins or other devices to move the water away from the bluff at that location. And then all of those options that we talk about moving the trail or as part of the work, all would require a license agreement with the Sea Ranch that would allow us to go in there and maintain the facilities that we build, and also to relocate the trail away safely from the Blufftop. Did I get most of that?
I guess now let's open up to questions, but first to questions that relate, in fact, to the options. Are there any, we've had this brief summary of options. Are there any specific questions that relate to options.
I'm not sure whether this does relate to the options. I think it does. It's, I seem to recall from a previous meeting that the issue was divided into two issues. One being to restore public access to walk on beach. The other to restoring the Blufftop Trail in its entire length. And it seems to me that if these two issues could be separated and looked at separately, that might be helpful in this site, which is obviously the most problematical site. That's just the end of the Blufftop Trail. It's just a little piece. It would be the lowest impact thing to do would just be to leave it and say goodbye. But obviously, public access to walk on beach is an important thing, and I think, in my view, it would be a good thing for the Sea Ranch to be asked to come up with some options for that that the county could look at. So that's my 2 cents on this.
It's so interesting you bring that up because the original report, the whole motivation for all this was Sea Pine Reach, but we decided in this process that we really need to look at the whole system here and how we're going to deal with not just the existing failures, but also future failures. So I agree with you, the whole impetus of this was the original report, which had mostly to do with Sea Ranch and closure to the public and Sea Ranch walk on beach. So that is true. But I do think we need a mechanism in place here so that we can deal with these things as they come up and work out a process for doing that.
Juliana Wells. I'm on Sea Pine Beach, one of the homes involved with this. I hope you've all looked at the pictures of the bridges that Susan Clark has provided. We talk about view restoration on the Sea Ranch. Well, mine will be destroyed by a bridge above. We talk about living lightly on the land, and if you're moving all kinds of machinery and doing all kinds of things to the Blufftop, that is certainly not living lightly on the land. And once again, my view of the commons and the commons in front of me will be changed. I don't know how anyone can predict with infallibility what drilling into a Blufftop will do. I'm glad we have engineers looking into it and geologists, but the thought of heavy machinery anywhere near that Blufftop, the thought of holes being drilled in that bluff, just really make me feel very uneasy. And I know no one can guarantee anything, but you're messing with something that has been fragile since before Susan Clark moved there. That's why there was no trail at the beginning. It was a fragile bluff. It still is a fragile bluff. And I'll have questions later for the board. Thank you.
I'm Rosemary Hawker, and I'm on this Sea Ranch Association board. Tell us again what some of the factors are that go into a soft solution. What are the factors that we would discuss? Cost, for instance? What are some of the factors that go into a soft solution?
Soft factors are physical impacts to the environment. We're not talking about cost in that respect. They're just, they would be ones that we would consider would have very little impact on the land itself. That doesn't have anything to do with privacy issues, doesn't have anything to do with ownership issues. It only has to do with doing the minimal amount that will still accomplish our goal.
And do you want to expand any more on that? And what factors are within of the physical solution? I'm a little surprised that it isn't cost and so on.
Those are factors to the county's long-term solutions. Those will be a factor in our criteria. There's no doubt about that. And not so much the initial implementation cost of it, because we don't have money to do these repairs, but in the long-term maintenance costs, where we will not have money to take care of these things. And our whole budget for the North Coast is about $50,000, $60,000 for maintenance and operations. If we get into a solution where we can't maintain it, then it's the integrity of the solution. It's not going to be helpful to anybody here. We're just going to lose it. So those are issues that are more hard issues for us to deal with budget-wise, and also there's structural solutions. So I hope that differentiates the two. It is a criteria for us as a county because even though we all pay taxes, they don't give a lot of that money to parks, unfortunately. So, and I know Mike's not here to look at other issues related to that, but that's something we'll have to look at, because if we can't maintain it, what's the point of doing it?
Okay, then, as I look down the bullet points for each one of the areas, could you just tell me, so that I can put down across from the bullet point, what is soft then? If it isn't, like, the very first one in each case is relocate the bluff trail, but let's go down the second or the third bullet, and what in your mind then is really considered soft?
Only the first one, and with the addition of maybe horizontal drains, because those are not really a surface issue. Those are drilled in and installed that way. So those would be the only soft ones that we would have listed here, and I don't know of any others.
Okay, and early on in your talk, you did say that you would prefer a soft solution.
Yes.
So, but there's nothing within the bullet points other than the very first one that really meets that criteria of being a soft solution.
How about landscaping, minor landscaping and contouring of the trail?
Those would all be helpful. I mean, I don't think any of those would hurt.
Okay, would that be soft?
It would also be any kind of landscape treatment would be soft, any kind of trail tread treatment would be soft. And these are all things that need to be entertained in the process, because I think some of the erosion can be alleviated a little bit just by rocking certain areas and kind of redirect drainage, so it wouldn't have a structure like a drain inlet, but maybe we just do a little bit of grading to move the water somewhere else. So those are all considered soft structures, but we're not getting to that level of detail on this. I think the Sea Branch actually did talk about that in their recommendations, and most of those were wholeheartedly in support of, because they are soft.
Are we in the comment period, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, indeed. Go ahead.
Thank you again, Ernie Carpenter, for Susan Clark, Unit 43A and B. And just to point out historically that the access way to Welcome Beach is what was called a vertical access way. The part in front of her house is not a part of the trail system per se. It was to be an access way. The original Bain bill talked about coming down at 24 and 25, and I've had many conversations with folks about how it got moved, and so far none of us have figured it out. And I remember I went on the board in January of 1981, and about, it was either March or April, late Joe Rodota came to me and said, by the way, come June or July, you have to have this resolved, or we're going to lose our funding. So, and Hugh Cotting's plane is standing by, we're going to fly you up there and take a look. So we were in such a time period that I'm not sure history mattered so much then, because the Bain bill had been passed, and somehow, if someone remembers how it got moved in front of her house, it might be productive to know that. But in any case, this story I'm telling you is because, as I mentioned, we want to come to you with a solution, and that solution basically is to go back to the stairway at 24 and 25. And I understand your concerns about the high tide, but essentially all the beaches here are trapped at high tide. I mean, you're not really creating a new situation. That this discussion happened with the existing stairway when it was put in, and I remember the late Jim Ayers bringing that up. Well, people are going to be trapped down there. So sure enough, I don't know if people have been trapped down there or not, but it's been there all this time. So what we would offer to you is to go back to the stairway at 24, 25, and perhaps there will be a great deal of support for that. And what you buy with that, not literally, but what you gain with that, pardon me, is that if somehow that can get moved up to the preferred alternative at 43A and B, we would have no objections to a mitigated negative deck. I think under CEQA you could choose that as a preferred alternative, put most of your analysis into that. But the alternative, well, we might as well get to it. I mean, we're going to ask that you buy the property. If you look at those pictures and why they're up there, is to graphically show you what 140 feet might look like. And I saw in your files when I came in to review them, and Susan Clark also has these pictures when 1987, or maybe it was 67, I can't remember, but when the picture was taken across there, it was the only house in this part of the Sea Ridge. And obviously it probably should have been placed there, but it's no fault of anyone's. It's her residence, she's proud of it. She does not want this structure. violates the Sea Ranch principles, which we support. And what you do is avoid any lengthy environmental investigations of your bridge, and whether it be riprap or whatever you would need to do there. You would certainly end the contention that we're going to give you, and you would probably end any challenges before public bodies that we would give you. So we're encouraging you to go back to 24, 25. If you can move that to preferred alternatives, then again, we would support your mitigated negative debt. We're really talking here about a long Jerry Rice fly pattern. And it's 200 feet from her house on over to the bend going out to the bridge. It's probably 400 feet on the beach. You've got a scale, you can do the better estimates, but really it's not a significant part of this, and I think it also allows you to restore the public access to the existing easement. So in a way, we want to create a win-win. Susan Clark doesn't want this site, but she's not going to give it up as long as her property value, her views, and what she thinks is basically well, it threatens the integrity of her house to keep punching holes and putting material there, putting keys into bedrock, or however you're going to anchor that stuff. I don't know how you're going to get up and down the cliff, but none of this can we support. So I just want to be clear on that, and hopefully give you an alternative. Thank you for the time.
That is one of the alternatives we did look at, and that will be explored. And we understand now that that's your preferred alternative.
Thank you.
Are you ready for questions for the board?
Sure. We're ready for questions for anybody.
Okay, Juliana Wells again, Unit 2825. I want to thank John Fox for making sure we got information about this meeting today. Thank you very much for that. For the board, is this the only input we're having as to what you're going to decide to work with the county? I don't know the procedure for input. We have not had a private meeting as far as members and Sea Ranch. It's always been collaborative with the county, which is the way you want to go. But if I want to, let's say, get down and dirty with my comments to the board, do we have a forum for that, or is that not going to be happening?
The answer to that is we don't have a forum for that right now.
Okay, is a private discussion with somebody?
And what you've just done is ask for one. And that's now going to be part of the grist for the board's mill.
Okay.
So not speaking for the board, speaking for myself personally, it sounds like a good idea to me.
Okay, good, because I would like to know how many other Sea Ranchers want this path opened no matter what, and how many of them are willing to sacrifice having the public go there, and how many of them are thinking in terms of a bridge or a riprap or whatever. The people who come here are the ones I believe who are most concerned, so I'm getting a lopsided point of view when my people are here saying, yeah, we really don't want a bridge, but I don't know how Sea Ranchers feel, and more importantly, I don't know how the board really feels. You want public access to be remaining on the bluff. The county wants public access to be remaining as it has been and restored as necessary. And I want safety as well. But I don't want my home to be shifting because of what man is doing. If nature does that, that's one thing, but if man is doing it, that's another. So I would request some sort of a meeting where we can talk just Sea Ranchers to the board, back and forth. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tim LeGree, Unit 2147. I have a question for Parks and Rec. Do you have any idea how many members of the public actually use these easements every year?
We did have some figures in our original report. Members of the public, separate of Sea Ranch and Sea Ranch renters. No, I don't have a specific number for that. I think we thought 149,000 people use the trails every year. But that, we don't have a differentiation between Sea Ranch renters, Sea Ranch homeowners, and the general public for that.
You don't have any way of
Actually,
tallying that by the way?
Actually, we do have some
payment?
numbers based on parking in the parking areas when we do our parking surveys, but I'll have to come back to you with some real numbers. And I can't tell you how accurate they'll be because we don't count people, we count cars.
Debbie Tyler did an excellent analysis which was actually published in the soundings, in one of those soundings I reviewed, getting ready for the talk this morning. And we would be happy to give you that analysis. I have it on my hard drive, I'll email it to you. It includes in calculating the public access, it includes some estimates of how many individuals correspond to the people who parked in the public parking areas for the public access points, but it also included estimates of how many non-Sea Ranchers rent Sea Ranch homes and thereby get access to all the trails at the Sea Ranch. And it's a very large number.
That'd be great, and if you could provide the methodology, that'd be great too.
Yeah, her report, she's a professional planner, her report is very thorough.
And she's about to make a comment, I think.
I don't remember the numbers, but the way it came out is that Sea Ranch provides, with its rental houses and its donation of regional park, which was originally Sea Ranch land and campground, more people access the coast through Sea Ranch than through Salt Point Park, which is approximately 10 miles of coastline, both of them. And that's not just rich people. We calculated the cost of staying at Sea Ranch at maximum occupancy of the rental houses here, and it averages $40 per person per night. So that a huge segment of the population gets to Sea Ranch, has access to all of the facilities here at very low cost.
Until you get them to behave.
I'm Susan
themselves on
Clark.
those trails.
Susan Clark, Unit 28, Lot 24, the lot. When I first built at the end of the 70s, there was no Sea Ranch trail along the bluff in front of my house. The bluff had been determined to be too fragile, and so the bluff that was along, the trail that was along the bluff top cut in right before my house, and it was a mid-unit trail. Even Sea Ranchers were not allowed to walk on the bluff in front of my house. That was the only area that was designated that way. And then what happened was when this mistaken connection got put in by the public, Sea Ranch then ignored the trail that was mid-unit, and Sea Ranchers started walking up and down there because why have two trails? All right. Now, if the proposal that Ernie was talking about is put back in place, Sea Ranchers will still be able to walk along the edge of the bluff. They will go down onto the cove by my house, just like everybody else would. But that was not a trail that was a Sea Ranch trail to begin with. So nobody had a right to that one to begin with. It just came as part of the public trail. The public trail is moved back down on the, the beach, on the cove. It takes care of quite a few problems. The 1987 bridge that was proposed there, that land no longer exists. If we had not hired an attorney to stop that, it would have gone in and it would have been done more destruction to the bluff. But worst of all, after all that, it'd be in the ocean now. And when they even came out to do the borings for the testing, the big equipment just shook the house. And that's just to dig holes. That's not to put in a bridge. What a lot of people think when they think of bridges is those bridges we have in the golf course that are low and flat, you go from one side to the other. That's not what a county parks bridge is. Look at the mock-up up there. From my house, I will be looking at a bridge. From most of the house, I will not see the horizon. I will not see the water. So by doing it the way, by putting it down on the beach, nobody will be any more threatened than they were before, because a lot of beaches are covered with water. And in certain areas in California, what they do is during the real high tides of the year for a month or two, they just close the beaches for that couple months. The rest of the time, it's easy. The high tide never does cover the beach. so it won't happen. I mean, think about all the money that could be spent on improvements if we weren't going through lengthy, complicated environmental processes for the next 5 years. We could get a far better looking stair step going down that would be functional and people would have use of it earlier. That's a better solution. Okay.
Hi, I'm Char Party. I live next to the house. That's where my house is. In all of the discussion today, I've heard very little about the Bain bill. Is the Bain bill no longer in effect? Has this been repealed and no one's told me? The Bain bill was a one-time granting of a public access easement. The original Bain bill had stairs going down where Susan says they should go down. And somehow, as Ernie said, that got moved and the trail came in front of our houses. I think the Bain bill needs to be a part of the discussion. Thank you.
Bonnie Cliffos, Unit 34C. I just have a question about the alternatives, and I don't mean for this to be provocative, maybe it is, but shouldn't one of the alternatives for 43A and 43B just be ending the trail? I understand that we have a desire to maintain public access to Waltham Beach, and that's great. But if all the alternatives are difficult, and for all the reasons that have been said, shouldn't the alternative of just ending the trail be one of the alternatives considered to be have a complete set?
In CEQA, a no project alternative is always one of the alternatives.
I think Bonnie is maybe being more radical than that, and simply saying that the public access trail would end at the trail to the walk-on beach parking area.
And I'm not saying that's my favorite or anything, I'm just saying that it seems like one of the many things that should be on every list, every time we talk about the options.
Are you approaching the...
See like a lefty.
Slowly. Following Bonnie's question, I have a hard time envisioning that at some point in the future, 10, 20, 30 years, no crystal ball at all, where it isn't going to be economically feasible to keep this trail open. If you get enough erosion to the private property or insufficient easement for a trail that isn't intrusive, at that point you're faced with basically condemnation of the property under public domain and expenses that will clearly dwarf the issues before us right now. So it also seems like the other kinds of alternatives of trying to find a way to legally gain access through commons and down streets and maintenance of law and order, pretty difficult to envision. So I'm just curious, can you envision a day down the road here where we probably will have a non-viable public access trail simply because it isn't economically feasible, no matter how politically desirable it is?
Well, I'm practically a child of the 60s, so I can envision almost anything. But yeah, I think in the long term, that is a real issue here in the long term. There's no doubt about that in my mind. And that's part of what I was saying about, we have these 5 sites right now where the erosion is cutting into our Blufftop trail. But we have 10 more that have been identified from previous geological reports that are going to be problems in the near future. So it's all going to disappear. And, but I will answer one question about the condemnation. We don't use the C word. We have never condemned on a property that we could find an error. So the only time we've ever done that in parks is when we could not find a legal heir to the property, so the money was put into an escrow account. So we don't use that as a mechanism. That's not our style.
I didn't think it was. I only meant to point out that when there's no more commons and there's only private property, there will be places, there ain't nowhere else to go unless you walk on water.
And again, when
That's
that's
not,
none of you folks will be here, right? Well,
I did it all too.
yeah. Yeah, I do see that, yeah.
Have we run out of questions? No, not yet.
Now, I know that you said that you'd really like to go into a collaborative process. Have you done this before with others? What would be a preferred way of going about this? Do you work with 100 people with 4 people from the county and 100 people from the Sea Ranch? Or what's a preferred way of starting a collaborative process?
I think the collaborative process probably would be between the board and the county. I hope that they represent your interests here, and I hope that they would inform you guys of what's going on. I know there's a lot of things that have been said to the board that I have not been privy to. So I know that most of you folks are corresponding with your board members outside of this process we're going through here, and I think that's really important that your desires and what your preferences are known. But I think at some point we have to have a smaller group to kind of determine where we're going with this, and then bring it back to the general membership to say, this is what we've all talked about, this is what we've agreed to, these are the criteria we use to develop this, and provide some sort of support in that respect.
And how ready are you to do that?
I think we're pretty close. I mean, we have all the options selected. I mean, there's still room to look at other options if people have them. I mean, there's always room for that, but it's at that point now where I need to start preparing a request for proposals for somebody to start doing the actual work. So we need to get to that point where we've selected those options, and then I can ask somebody to give me a proposal to do that work for us. So we're a little ways away still, I think, but I think we're moving in the right direction. I think Marty's expressed some, like most of us have, that this is taking really long to do it, and it is taking really long. So yeah, moving forward would be a good thing for all of us.
And do you see the county as kind of the lead there, or are they waiting for the Sea Ranch to come in and ask for more talks, or is the county going to contact the Sea Ranch to say, it's time for us to start the talks?
I think what we need to do, and I think Michelle touched on this, is we need to develop our criteria, just as the Blufftop principles were developed. We need to develop the things that we want included in the evaluation process for selecting a proposal. And then we need to sit down with the Sea Ranch board members and kind of work out how we're going to evaluate each alternative and see if we can come to agreement on 2 or 3, or maybe even 1 in some cases, and simplify things down and then move forward that way.
Okay.
I'm going to interrupt just a moment. Are you now comfortable that you have all of the alternatives either on this list, or you mentioned a couple that are not on this list, but you sort of have in the back of your mind? Are you comfortable that there is now, that you could put together a document that summarizes the alternatives that we could use as a document, as the focal point for a workshop with our members?
I think what we have to do next, and this is another thing we touched on, is we need to have more analysis of the impacts done so that everybody has a full, complete understanding of what each of these solutions will entail and what it's going to require to get them done. A lot of people have expressed a lot of concern about heavy equipment on the bluffs and what that's going to do to the coastal environment, visual aesthetics, the drilling, the things like that. So those things I think need to be addressed more in a civil and structural engineering standpoint. And once we bring those back, how we're going to do it, how we're going to maintain it, all those things. Once we know those things, then I think it's more of a forum for discussion about alternatives. And I don't know if that makes sense to other people, but I have heard a lot of concern about that. And once again, those are hard solutions, and they do have impacts, and we need to make sure that we're not going to do any more damage than we have to do just to get in and out there and mitigate what we can, and then have the project be complete. So,
Jim and Mark, Kathy, can I follow this up? Okay, thank you. Following that, I was just thinking, actually previous to this meeting, that some of the non-technical, if you will, related but non-technical alternatives are going to be very important, or effects are going to be very important, and we haven't really gotten into that. For example, if we do riprap, and if is in capital letters, but okay, that's trucks. Eric has come up with a cost estimate. Somewhere that means he's got an idea of how many yards of riprap that is. We know how much a truck holds, so that's X riprap, Y trucks, weighing Z tons, and we know about where they have to come on Sea Ranch roads. Can Sea Ranch roads take that? And on and on. In a freshman environmental science class, I had the class figure out how many trucks it would take to remove a C&D site that was on the college campus. And they all got it, and in fact, the site was removed next year, by coincidence, I think. But this, seriously, this is the sort of thing that even without a involved engineering study, we can start thinking about at the Sea Range.
Kathy Gordon, 35894. Regarding the environmental review, in your letter to John Fox, you said you had budgeted $25,000 for the environmental review, and that you were looking for a grant for another $25,000, I think it was. How?
About $125,000.
$125,000 beyond that, okay. Number one, is that a coastal commission grant? Is that what you're looking for?
Not coastal commission, coastal conservancy.
Okay, coastal conservancy, right. Number two, how long does the grant process take?
It could be anywhere from 1 to 6 months. Generally, that's about right. Once they've looked at funding, we have a project description and a work plan. We have to go to the board, we have to get authorization to apply for the money, and we have to go to their board and formally apply for the money as well. So it's at least a 1 to 6 month process once we've got all the work in and to get the money. So it's a little while.
And so the environmental review process won't start until you get the money for it?
The first part of the environmental review process will start as soon as I have my funding in place for this year, which would be July 1. That would be the first $25,000 doing impact analysis. And then I would be going out and hiring a consultant once we get the grant money. Correct. And it could be a few months, yes.
Thank you.
And just a reminder too that we also have to find grant funding to do any of the remedial work that we do. We don't have money in place to do the work. There's probably grants out there to do it, but we have to apply for the money formally. And it only pays for implementing it, doesn't pay for maintaining it. So, you know, if there's a cost associated with that, we need to identify that. The board needs to approve a budget for that, and we have to go forward that way.
I have a last question, Jim, if I may. Mark, do you think it's feasible for us to put together a project plan, stepwise project plan, in such a way that the whole process becomes more predictable? It sounds to me as if the process is going to be complicated with branches, whatever we do, but if we were to start with a plan with some timelines on it that said what was going to happen when, we would at least then know if we're falling behind or you know, getting into unanticipated difficulties. One of the difficulties that I have on behalf of the association is the sort of, in a way, unpredictable nature of the time requirements that we have to spend on this project. And if we could reduce it to a plan that we could rely upon and note deviations from, which would be expected, it might be very helpful.
Yeah, I think we can put together a timeline for you that kind of discusses the steps and where we're going with this. Once we get a consultant on board, the consultant will be preparing work and he'll be paid to work on this project. Unfortunately, I have about 15 projects, and this is in my top 5, but I still have, you know, 14 other ones to do. And so there is a time constraint for me, and you know, I do apologize for that. I'm a public servant, but I'm serving a lot of public. So I'm kind of stretched a little bit thin here. But I think once we have a consultant on board, things will move on a very predictable time frame. The meetings will be scheduled long in advance for environmental review, for scoping, for all those things. People will be noticed weeks in advance. And I think we can probably put together some sort of timeline that at least makes us more comfortable with where I feel we're going and a time frame for it. Thank you.
comments? Any of my fellow board members want to make any comments at this point?
I guess I'd like to make one comment. Something that was said earlier might have implied that the board was going to have secret meetings with the county to talk about these issues, and I want to assure everyone the board is not going to have secret meetings with the county to talk about these issues. One thing I could envision might be that staff, that John and Randy might meet with Mark to talk about some of these options and try to cull the list before we had a public meeting to talk about them, or before it was presented to the board at a public meeting. But, you know, the board is not going to go, and a board member might attend that meeting. We have a very firm policy that we never have a majority of board members at a meeting where anything is discussed that might conceivably come to the board for business. So if John and Randy wanted to have a meeting with Mark and they wanted to have a couple of board members be there, they could do that, but there would not be more than 3. So I don't want anybody to have the wrong idea about how this might go forward. And also Mark mentioned that the board had received comment from members that the county's not aware of. To my understanding, almost all the information all the communication we've had with members has been in public meetings. We've received some correspondence from members that I suspect has not been shared with the county, but you know, we're not hiding anything from the county either.
And that wasn't implied.
Yeah, no, I didn't think you were, but I don't believe there's anything substantive that we've been told about anybody's point of view that you're not also aware of.
Yeah, I will ask one more question, and that is that we have separated the Broadbridge Rock Cod Main Sail from Seapine Reach. I mean, we're really thinking of these, I gather, that as two separate projects. No? Yes?
I'd like to respond to that first.
Please.
If I may. I did that only for purposes of simplicity in the report. If I was to go through each site separately, I think it would take forever and people would get bored. So it was simply to provide a summary that was done.
And there's a bigger issue that Michelle should talk a little bit about with trying to do that.
And I'm just going to talk about it just really briefly, because it's kind of late. This is a really huge issue. It's segmentation, and that's basically CEQA prevents us from analyzing separate pieces of a project individually. We really are required to take a look at the whole project. So, and that's where the programmatic level document comes in handy sometimes, is if we're not prepared to take a look at everything at the minute detail for every aspect of a project, then we can look at things kind of superficially and then go back and do the detailed analysis. But we really can't break apart a project and analyze each part independently of the other. So I don't know if that confuses the whole question more, or
no, that's okay, but I just, and I don't know that we can have an answer, but I know that Ernie is working with Susan, and I don't know if Ernie's, and it's perhaps not my business either to know whether Ernie is working with Julia and Sharp. But so when we come forward, do we come forward as an association, or are there other talks going on, say from Seapine with Ernie and county, and I mean, how separate are these? How separate is this? Are we all one association, or are there other things going on too that we don't know about?
Well, this is my first meeting, so I don't know.
I'm going to go there with that question.
You're going to what?
I can't really go there with that question because
I didn't know if you were going to dodge it or not.
No, I think there are private property rights here. There's also association rights here. There's the public access issue here. So there's a lot of underlying issues, and Ernie's come and reviewed my files. They're public information, so he probably did that for for his own reasons and for his own perspective on this thing. To go back and look at historical, but I think it's all one issue, and I don't really think it's, a private property issue. I think it's just one big issue for all of us to deal with. Susan may have her own particular things that she doesn't want to see there, and that's going to be true of almost anybody that wants the trail. Some people are not going to want to see a bridge with handrails, like she doesn't want to see a bridge with handrails. So, there's individual rights and things that they don't want to see, and then there's a group dynamic that we need to deal with as well. So, I think all of that comes into play.
Just a few, I guess, closing comments here. First off, I'd like to thank you, Mark, Michelle, Eric, for being here, for talking with us about this, for opening up the discussion, and for inviting further collaboration, because collaboration is something we would like very much to have happen. Collaboration that includes not only the association, but also those individual members who are affected by this activity. I have said before, and you've heard it from us before, and I'll say it again, we're impatient. We want this problem solved, and to the extent that we can help you in solving the problem, solving the problems, if there are ways in which we can be useful to help grease the skids with the political processes, we'd be pleased to be told about it and do our best to do that. As we go on with planning, I think, let me just emphasize, you've already included the criteria that Marty described in your thinking, but I do want to re-emphasize the fact that that set of criteria came out of an open meeting, out of a set of open meetings, an open process with our membership. Once the board put its imprimatur on that set of criteria, we take it very, very seriously. And so think of that as what we would like to see as a central core element in the planning process. I think that the notion of privacy is exceedingly important here on the Sea Ranch, and so the protection of physical and visual privacy is very, very important. I think avoiding routing the public access trail on association property wherever possible is also a pretty fundamental tenet of our thinking. Recognizing that the reality is that the bluff is gradually disappearing, and there's very little that we can do to escape that. We might slow it down from time to time, but we're not going to escape it. We still would like to have solutions that are longer rather than shorter term, if nothing more than to avoid having to go through 5-year processes like this one. Finally, this notion of developing solutions that have the support of the Sea Ranch, our members, and the surrounding community, I think is very important. So as we move along, I know that meetings are sort of high maintenance kinds of things. I mean, they're an overhead item for people who are trying to get real work done. And yet meetings are an important way for us to be able to get our comments and thoughts back to you. It goes without saying, I guess, that we expect the county's solutions to be environmentally sensitive and carry minimal costs for the association. We appreciate that the county is under financial and other pressures that divert its attention, but the public access Bluff Trail is a very important part. As Dibby indicated, we're responsible for a great deal more access to the coast than most any other 10-mile stretch along here, except perhaps the Sonoma Coast beaches. We think that solving this problem should really take significant priority in the county's resource allocations, and we'll try to convey that message to people like Mike Riley. So, with that, Mark, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, I think what my focus has been here and what I've tried to do is not just look at these 5 sites. We're all focusing on these 5 sites, okay? What are we going to do in the future? Are we going to go back through this process again? Can we find some solution that we can all work with in the future, that we can avoid this? That we can all sit down for one meeting and say, okay, this is what's going on, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to get there? Because, geez, I don't want to go through this again either. I mean, so, you know, where are we going with this in the long term, I guess? And that's my thing. It's like, I think it's up to us as a group to kind of figure out how we're going to deal with this in the future and put something in place that we can all relate back to and go, okay, this is how we do business up here. And, you know, this isn't going to go away. Like we're all saying, Blufftop's retreating. There's nothing we're going to do about that. In the long term, it's, you know, a matter of whether we're going to be able to keep the trail open or not. And it's a matter of how we do that as a group. And I think that's where I'd like to get to. I mean, I don't want to leave this job, but this thing's still hanging out there for the next 12 person that comes along. I want this thing to be resolved in one way or the other. You know, eventually it will go away, yeah, but what about the next 25 years? I mean, can we find something for the next 25 years? Then I'll be dead in care, so. No, I'm just kidding. That's all I really have to say.
You've got lifetime tenure.
That's all I really have to say about it. I'd really just like to reach some resolution on this so we all just have this really good working relationship. The trails people at Sea Ranch work great with our staff. I mean, we just have a really good relationship. And, you know, people want to talk about the Bain bill. I don't want to talk about the Bain bill. You know, the Bain bill didn't make anybody happy, did it? It certainly made me happy. I mean, as an individual, because, you know, having a fixed easement on a Blufftop is like one of the stupidest things I've ever seen in my entire life. So, you know, does that make sense? No, it doesn't make sense, but that's what it was, and we're dealing with it now. So let's just deal with it, and let's find some common ground here that we can all just work these things out. That's all I got to say.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you very much. And I guess in the Sea Ranch tradition, any help with the chairs would be appreciated.
What I suffered. That's right. Why jump all this stuff onto the camera?
I'm disagreeing with her on a lot of things.
Park's way over. So they just put a mock-up on it? Well, how did you get that picture? Randy. That's her house. I wrote a long history here.